Millions of years ago, the land that would one day be called North America was wild and untamed. Forests of towering conifers stretched across the horizon, their roots gripping ancient soil, their canopies rising like living walls. Rivers thundered through valleys carved from stone, their waters icy and merciless, carrying the songs of time in their endless flow. The winds were sharp, often filled with the scents of pine, of rain-soaked earth, and of blood carried on the air from some hunt or kill. This was a world not yet softened by civilization. It was a land where survival was carved day by day, not guaranteed but seized with risk, courage, and cunning. Among this harsh wilderness, where giant mammoths trudged like moving mountains and dire wolves prowled with silent hunger, lived a small human tribe. They had no fortress, no walls of stone, no more than sharpened sticks, flint blades, and the glow of fire to shield them. They were fragile in body, but not in spirit. Each man, woman, and child bore the marks of hardship in their eyes and on their weathered faces. They were not masters of the land, only guests trying to remain unnoticed by the predators that ruled it. Food was never certain, and warmth was always borrowed from flames that could be stolen by a wind or rain in a heartbeat. Among them was Gale, a young hunter on the edge of manhood. His shoulders had only just begun to broaden, yet his eyes carried the restless sharpness of someone older, someone already forced to see how quickly life could be taken. Gale had been born in the depths of a winter so cruel that half the tribe had perished. His earliest memories were not of comfort or play, but of silence broken by the cries of the hungry, of hollow cheeks and desperate eyes. From his earliest days, he understood that life was a fragile spark, flickering in a world eager to snuff it out. Gale rose before dawn each morning, when the stars still burned like cold fire across the endless skies. He walked beyond the circle of his tribe, moving quietly, his breath a pale mist in the freezing air. He learned the land not through words, but through signs etched into the earth and air. A broken branch told of a passing herd. A patch of disturbed soil revealed the movement of wolves. Even silence was a teacher, for when birds and insects stopped their songs, something larger was near. To survive here was not to fight blindly, but to read the world as if it were a vast, living scroll. Ignorance was death, awareness was life. The tribe hunted often, and every hunt was a gamble. To face a mammoth was to risk being crushed beneath tons of muscle and bone. To chase a bison was to dare its horns and hooves, each capable of ending a man's life in seconds. Gale had seen strong hunters, the men he admired, as struck down in these hunts, their blood steaming against frozen earth, their bodies left behind as scavenger birds wheeled above. Yet hunger was a force stronger than fear. Children's stomachs growled, and the old ones withered when food was scarce. To deny the hunt was to accept death in another form. One autumn evening, Gale stood with his father on a ridge. Below them, in a meadow brushed gold by fading sunlight, a group of giant sloths moved slowly, tearing branches from trees with curved claws. Gale's father was a man scarred by hunts, his chest crisscrossed with the marks of beasts. He placed a calloused hand on Gale's shoulder and spoke in a low, steady voice. Patience. To rush at life is to be its prey. Wait for the moment that belongs to you. Gale remembered those words long after that day, for patience would become the difference between returning with food or becoming food himself. At night, the tribe gathered around the fire. Sparks rose into the dark like lost stars. Elders told stories passed through countless generations, tales of ancestors who had walked the same valleys, faced the same beasts, and wrestled the same hunger. The stories were not idle entertainment. They were lessons wrapped in memory, warnings carved into the skin of time. Gale listened intently, storing each word as though it were a weapon. He knew one day it would be his task to carry the weight of those stories, to add his own to the fire's circle. The land was both provider and destroyer. The rivers gave fish but could sweep away a man with icy currents. The forests gave shelter but hid predators whose golden eyes glowed from shadows. One evening, while Kale gathered wood for the fire, he felt it gaze upon him. The hairs on his neck rose, and his grip tightened around his flint blade. Between the trees, a saber-toothed cat's eyes flickered, its massive body tense with predatory power, its teeth like ivory daggers gleaming in the half-light. Kale froze, heart pounding. He remembered his father's lesson, patience. He did not run, for running was the invitation of prey. The cat stared, tail flicking, and then slipped silently back into the forest. Kale returned to camp shaken but alive, with a deeper respect, almost reverencia for the power of the land. As seasons turned, Kale grew from boy into hunter. His arms thickened with the strength of throwing spears, his legs hardened from chasing prey across open plains. Yet strength alone could not keep him alive. He learned the art of uniting signals with eyes and hands, silent coordination, the discipline of the hunt as a group. Alone, a man was fragile. Together, they were a pack. When they succeeded, the tribe feasted, children's laughter mingling with the crackling fire. When they failed, silence reigned, broken only by the whimpers of hungry children. Life froze and fell on the edge of each hunt, like a heartbeat that could stop at any moment. One bitter day, as winter began to creep across the plains, Kale joined the hunters in following a bison herd. The sky hung heavy with great clouds, and the cold bit into their bones. They moved for hours, bent low, each step measured. The bison were massive, their shoulders thick with muscle, their hooves pounding like thunder when they ran. The hunters formed a crescent, hearts racing as they prepared. At the signal, they surged forward with cries that split the air. The herd stampeded, the earth trembling beneath their feet. Kale's spear flew from his hand, striking true, sinking into flesh. The beast roared and fell, shaking the ground. Triumph surged through the hunters, not joy but relief. A meat meant survival through the bitter months to come. That night, smoke curled skyward as the tribe feasted. Children gnawed bones with eager hunger, and elders smiled faintly with relief. Kale sat by the fire, the warmth easing his weary muscles. In that moment, he felt something stir within him. It was not pride, but understanding. His life was woven into theirs, his strength only meaningful in the survival it offered them. No man could live alone in this land. Unity was their only hope, and unity demanded courage, sacrifice, and sometimes blood. But survival never allowed rest for long. The smell of blood from the bison drew predators. Long after the fire burned low, hunters kept guard. Kale stood watch, eyes sweeping the shadows beyond the firelight, hand tight around his spear. He knew that tomorrow would bring new trials, that survival was never a promise, only a battle renewed with each sunrise. Yet as he stared into the dark, he felt the quiet determination that had guided his people since the beginning. Endure. 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 The night deepened, stars glittering cold above the plain. A wolf howled in the distance, a cry both haunting and beautiful. Kale lifted his gaze to the heavens. He wondered if the stars had watched countless lives before his, countless hunters, countless struggles, countless fires burning against the night. Perhaps they remembered, or perhaps they simply burned without care. But in that moment, with his tribe alive and fed, Kale felt a fragile spark of hope. Small though it was enough to face the coming winter. For the story of life a million years ago was not simply the fight to survive. It was the will to believe survival was worth the fight. Winter descended like a predator, silent at first, then sudden and merciless. The winds howled across the plains, stripping leaves from trees, dragging cold into every hollow and crevice. Snow began to fall in sheets, covering the land in a heavy silence that smothered sound and buried trails. For the tribe, it was the season of hunger, the season of testing. The rivers froze, cutting off fish. The forests stood bare, their branches skeletal and unyielding. Even the herds, those vast lifelines of meat and bone, moved southward, beyond reach. Where once the land had breathed with life, it now seemed to hold its breath, keeping every morsel locked away. Kale watched his people weaken as days stretched into weeks. The old ones moved slower, their breaths rattling with fatigue. Children whimpered with hunger, their eyes too large for their faces. The fire burned constantly, yet even its warmth could not drive away the chill that seemed to seep into their bones. Each evening, the tribe huddled close, not just for warmth, but for comfort, whispering stories of springs past, when the land awoke again. Yet those promises felt fragile, as though winter itself might never end. One morning, Kale rose before the sun, his body aching with emptiness. His stomach twisted with hunger, but it was not only his own pain that drove him forward. He could not bear the sound of children crying, or the dull silence of the elders who no longer had the strength to speak. Something in him hardened. If the land would not provide easily, then he would carve sustenance from it with his own hands. He spoke to 3 hunters, a man older and stronger than he, and told them of his plan. Together, they would push deep into the frozen wilderness, further than they had dared, searching for herds that had not yet vanished into the south. The journey began in silence, each step crunching in the snow. Their breath rose in clouds, quickly stolen by the wind. They carried only what they could bear: spears hardened in fire, stone knives, and hides wrapped tightly around their bodies. For days, they traveled across a white wasteland, their feet numb, their bellies empty. Wolves howled in the distance, shadows on the edge of vision, watching, waiting. Hunger gnawed at them, turning their limbs heavy, their thoughts sluggish. Yet Gale pressed on, his eyes scanning the horizon with relentless focus. On the 3rd day, faint tracks appeared in the snow of bison. The sight struck them like lightning. Hope surged, filling their chests with fire. The hunters followed the trail, hearts racing despite their exhaustion. Hours later, they crested a rise and saw it, a herd of bison moving slowly across a frozen meadow, steam rising from their nostrils, their thick coats dusted with snow. They were enormous, each step breaking the crust of ice with dull cracks. For the hunters, it was salvation walking on hooves. Gale knew what it meant. This was their only chance. If they succeeded, the tribe would eat. If they failed, they would return empty-handed if they returned at all. The hunters crouched low, spreading into a wide arc. Every muscle trembled with both fear and determination. The bison were not prey to be taken lightly. A single charge could break bones, crush bodies into the frozen ground. But hesitation would doom them all. With a cry that split the silence, they rushed forward. Spears whistled through the air. The herd erupted into chaos, snow flying, the ground trembling beneath the thunder of hooves. Kale's heart hammered as he sprinted, his breath burning in his chest. He flung his spear with every ounce of strength. It struck, sinking deep into the side of a great bull. The animal bellowed, staggering, before collapsing into the snow. The hunters roared in triumph, their voices raw with relief. Blood steamed against the white ground, and for the first time in weeks, the promise of life returned. But the wilderness did not surrender easily. As the hunters worked to carve meat from the fallen bison, shadows moved at the edge of the trees. Wolves, drawn by the smell of blood, circled with hungry eyes. Their howls rose, chilling the hunters even as they labored. Kale tightened his grip on his knife, his body tense. The wolves edged closer, their teeth flashing in the dim light. For a moment, it seemed the hunters might have to fight for the very prize they had won. Yet Gale stepped forward, raising his arms, shouting with a voice louder than his years. The wolves paused, uncertain. His courage gave the others strength, and together they brandished spears, driving the pack back into the shadows. When they returned to the tribe, dragging meat heavy with promise, the camp erupted in relief. Children rushed forward, their laughter echoing like music against the cold. Elders wept, their wrinkled hands reaching to touch the hunters as though to assure themselves it was real. That night, the fire burned high, the air filled with the scent of roasting flesh. Cale sat near the flames, exhaustion pulling at him, but his heart lighter than it had ever been. His people would live another season. The taste of victory was not just in the meat, but in the hope it rekindled. Yet Cale knew survival was never a single triumph. It was a chain of battles, each one demanding as much as the last. The land offered no promises. Days after their feast, a storm swept down from the mountains, burying the world in snow. The hunters could not leave camp, the winds cut through hides, and the snow blinded their eyes. For 3 days, they remained huddled, feeding on what they had, waiting for the storm's fury to pass. It was a reminder that nature was not conquered by a single victory, it was endured, storm after storm, season after season. As the weeks dragged on, Cale began to notice the way others looked to him. Not only the young hunters, who followed his movements in silence, but the elders, whose eyes weighed him as though testing his spirit. Leadership was not given in this world, it was earned in the crucible of necessity. Cale did not seek it, but he did not turn from it either. When danger rose, he stepped forward. When despair threatened, he reminded the tribe that life still flickered, that the land would eventually thaw, that spring always returned, even if winter fought fiercely to deny it. One night, when the fire burned low, Cale sat alone, sharpening a spear. His father approached, the man's face etched with years of struggle. He lowered himself beside Cale and spoke quietly. "I see what you carry. The weight is heavy, but it is not yours alone. Remember that." His father's words struck deep, for Cale understood that strength was not only in arms but in knowing that survival was a shared burden. No man, no matter how strong, could carry it alone. The final weeks of winter stretched endlessly, but slowly the snow began to soften. Rivers cracked and sang as ice broke apart. Birds returned, their cries piercing the silence of the plains. The first shoots of green appeared, timid but resilient. The land was awakening, and with it, the tribe stirred from the edge of despair. They had endured. They had bent but not broken. Cale stood one morning on the ridge where he had once watched sloths with his father. The horizon glowed with the pale light of spring. Below him, the land stretched wide, scarred by winter but still alive. He breathed deeply, the air sharp and cold, but carrying a promise of warmth. He thought of the hunts, of the wolves, of the long nights when the fire barely kept the dark at bay. He thought of the faces of his people, lined with hunger but lit by hope. In that moment, Cale understood that survival was not merely the act of living another day. It was the act of holding on when the world seemed determined to strip everything away. It was courage found in the face of despair, unity born in hardship, and the unyielding will to endure. This was the truth of life in that ancient land. Survival was never granted, only fought for, again and again. And so, as the tribe prepared to greet the new season, Cale felt the fire within him burn brighter. The battles would never end, the wilderness would never grow gentle, but he no longer feared it. He was a child of this land, shaped by its trials, tempered by its cold. Where others saw only cruelty, he saw a teacher. Where others saw death, he saw the chance to carve life from it. And in that realization, Cale became more than just a hunter. He became the spirit of survival itself, an ember that would carry his people forward into whatever battles lay ahead.